Welcome to DNX.Solutions podcast, leading the way in cloud modernization services.
Welcome everyone to our discussion on cybersecurity trends for 2025. My name is Griffin. I'm the CTO at DNX.Solutions. I am joined by my esteemed guests. I've got Taminda, who's our compliance specialist, and I've also got Shannon, who is our security practice lead. Shannon, you wrote a really insightful blog about a week ago, I think it was, around some of the trends for 2025. What inspired you to do that?
It's just because of what's happening, especially when it comes to AI security. It's very complex and it's very challenging for our clients nowadays. And I kind of wanted to write a blog that helped them think about maybe not just overall cybersecurity trends that are coming out, but also focus a little bit more on AI security. From an engineering security perspective, what's happening right now is kind of unprecedented. I mean, I say unprecedented because, before when cloud computing came out, I thought that was just a fad, and a lot of people did. They're like, oh no, on-prem is the way to go. And now we're seeing this huge shift in AI and in the security involving it. And, organizations are now evolving quickly, but without proper security controls behind the evolution of the tech stacks and the technologies that they're implementing. Secondly, I guess the traditional perimeter security has kind of dissolved. There's a lot of hybrid organizations, struggling to secure AI workloads across hybrid environments, especially some of the large enterprises, particularly with API security and data flow protections. And finally, compliance requirements are evolving rapidly, right? You've got the DTA's guidance that just recently came out. You have the updates in NIST 800-53, which is my Bible, being in the military for 20 years and working in cybersecurity, putting out guidance. We're focusing here at DNX on helping clients, and I'm just kind of seeing some trends there for 2025. So.
You raised a really great point there, Shannon, about the complex compliance environment. Australia today has not yet actually formalised its position on AI usage in a legislation, unlike the European Union, which is the only act in the world currently with a firm position. So as you mentioned, the DTA guidelines are a great starting point for Australian organisations to really think about where the future might go. But also, you mentioned NIST, but also there is an ISO standard as well that's very, very useful in that space. But I would encourage organisations to lean towards the EU direction and model their policies and procedures accordingly.
So if we sort of take a sidestep on the AI side, which is a huge topic, right? And we could go really deep into AI security, data breach, lineage, all of that sort of stuff. But from a compliance perspective overall, there is still a data privacy, information security privacy, all of those sorts of requirements. What are you sort of seeing, and what are how are everything that customers are trying to do and the trends that you're seeing, how are they being sort of impacted from a compliance perspective?
Well, I'm seeing this year, for those that aren't aware, the ISO 27701 deadline to upgrade from 2013 to 2022 is looming. It is October, people, so you must get that. I'm seeing a huge shift for organisations to update their controls and policies to comply with that. We've had the recent changes with the Privacy Act, which has increased the actual financial impact for organisations that fail to protect data, that fail to have an active incident response plan in place. And that ties very well into the Corporations Act, which is now giving, actually applying board level and SLT level personal liability as well in the financial and even criminal sense. So what I'm seeing with our clients and across the industry is a increased participation from board levels, from C-suite, SLT members around really owning and understanding those obligations and driving a cultural shift to have a security-focused culture across the business. And that's reinforced by their certifications that they choose to embark upon.
That's a really interesting point, right? We always talk about SOC 2 or ISO, CDR, the IRAP, sort of they're the frameworks.
Correct.
But you don't necessarily need to align to a framework, do you? Having the right controls or the behaviours in place and not necessarily enforcing, but having policies and guidelines for those things.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct, absolutely. And you can pick and choose and blend your frameworks. I mean, yes, certification is very powerful and often essential if you're, depending on your industry or your client contracts. But that doesn't stop any organization from referencing these guidelines, just like you would legislation, and taking the best practice and using that risk management foundation that is consistent across all frameworks to really govern and drive best practice in a culture that's security focused. But then that also assists the security engineers and the IT teams substantially, because we know number one incidence is still people, still induced by people's behaviour and their actions, and we all get complacent even when we're in, focusing on security all the time. So driving a culture from top down across all levels of the organisation supports your IT and your security engineering and empowers the compliance with that continuous control.
That's super interesting, because we always talk about like democratization of security, but also democratization of compliance.
Yes.
It's not just the board's responsibility, or as you rightly pointed out, the SLT's responsibility. Right? It should be everybody's responsibility.
Absolutely. And how many times do you see organisations, they're guilty when they onboard a person, they flood them with 100 policies to read. And the chicken flick security on e-learning, that's just not enough in this environment, and particularly with AI, and what we're seeing an increase of shadow AI across the organisation that's becoming increasingly complex and hard for security teams to manage.
It's a really good point. Like you, Shannon, in your blog, you had 3 main categories. How do you sort of prioritise those areas around, business, AI, cybersec, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are very interconnected, right? Especially when you tie them to the security lifecycle and the models that exist. First, you've got your model security, because I know my blog focuses pretty heavily on AI security, where you see an increased number of model poisoning attacks and prompt injection vulnerabilities. I think the most famous one, we had a discussion with a couple of our partners last week about it, where, a guy was able to get a chat bot to sell a car for $1, and he ended up suing because they said, no, we're not going to abide by that. A chat bot, it's a chat bot, it's not coming from us. The courts uphold his decision, so he was able to get a car for $1 plus all legal fees paid for from that court case. And then secondly, a big part of that is data protection, right? AI systems actually require quite a massive amount of training data that companies have to put in there, whether it be the PDFs that you're uploading in Bedrock, and that creates a new challenge around, data classification, protection, and privacy in the end. And they need to implement proper security controls following, for example, AWS shared security responsibility model, and then you have a lot of zero trust principles. And I know I focus very hard on zero trust, but it's very militaristic, and it reminds me of how we did security in the military, where it's like everything's compartmentalized. And when people say blast radius, you want to reduce the blast radius if there is a breach. That's exactly how we talked about it in the military. Like if we lose one battalion as part of a brigade, you want to reduce the effect it has on the overall organization. And that's where zero trust comes in, and limiting access to certain areas of your infrastructure. And what's concerning about a lot of what I'm seeing right now, and someone quoted me, it's like, if you're optimistic about cybersecurity, you're ignorant about the reality of what we're dealing with. And it's absolutely true.
It's sad in some ways, though, really, when you say it that way.
Yeah, even after, and she touched upon this, even after organizations implement a lot of these security controls, we're seeing things like shadow AI allowing for the loss of IP or leaking information that you don't want to. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think organisations, we're all guilty of getting busy, and it's always, we always have this best interest with organisations to, maintain on top of compliance and our monitoring. I think where AI is going to become very, very valuable is, using it in more monitoring tools for your threats and vulnerabilities, as Shannon discussed, but also across your governance risk compliance tools, so that you can use AI to cross-check your legislation, your obligations, make sure the controls are actually happening, streamline that task management between people, so that compliance isn't such an arduous job, and not the job where everyone says, oh, here comes the compliance manager. It's actually use automation and AI to actually enhance and make it more efficient and more interesting and create more value.
It's an interesting point because compliance isn't just a one-stop thing, right?
Correct.
You have to consistently do it. And as business landscapes change and as your new markets change, customer demands change, and even the way that you operate your business and your staffing,
Yes.
you need to update this, right? So yeah, utilizing AI as a tool to assist. Amazing stuff, guys, and there's so much more that we could sort of unpack here. Well, I want to get really practical, right? I want to give some advice. Let's try and share some information here. What advice, or what's your top advice for the listeners in terms of security or compliance in terms of 2025? What should they do?
I would say top focus area at the moment is I'd look at supply chain risk. If you have already done your certifications in ISO, etc., look into the supply chain, look down your second and third level suppliers, how they're using AI, how they're using data, where they're doing their data flows, and really integrate and probe in that supplier management space. But also, if you're not past your certifications, just get back to basics and choose your frameworks. Get a certification model. You might not need to go all the way to certification, as I mentioned before. You can take out those best practices and best guidelines. And don't forget your basics of risk management. The fundamental principles of risk management still remain, whether it's AI or whether it's physical security. So get back to basics, don't get overwhelmed, and just start.
Love it. Shannon?
I guess my biggest point is to implement proper security controls based on what you're saying in the compliance frameworks that you're using, right? There's a lot of organizations that kind of pencil whip, their compliance certification, SOC 2, ISO, and they do it for a short period of time, but they don't preach it, right? They don't practice, they preach it, but they don't practice what they preach in the end. And, implementing something like the 800-53 guidelines, particularly around, let's say, AI system boundaries is something that you could do, you can add into your frameworks. And that helps future-proof what's coming. I think at one point talked about quantum and encryption and stuff like that in a previous segment, and they need to start future-proofing their infrastructure, their data, and how they're handling it.
Yeah. So. Fantastic. So much to unpack there. So much more that we could talk about. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. So, guys, I really do appreciate your time today and sharing some of these insights. Look forward to more blogs from both of you, right, as we sort of try and pull apart some of these really interesting topics for customers. Folks, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for watching this. If you want more information, please jump onto the DNX.Solutions website. We've got not only Shannon's blog up there, but a whole bunch of other information as well. And Taminda's going to have a blog up there very shortly, no doubt, as well, as we continuously evolve our trends and our thought patterns for 2025 and around the cybersecurity space and compliance space. So until next time, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the DNX Solutions podcast. Follow us on socials or visit DNX.Solutions for more.